Okay, hi everyone, welcome back to the Comptia Security Plus course, Server Defense. Now we come down to it. Servers are the cornerstone of data. They store it, transfer it, archive it, and allow or disallow access to it. They need super fast network connections that are monitored and baselined regularly. They require an admin to configure policies, check logs, and perform audits frequently. They exist in networks both large and small within public and private clouds and are often present in virtual fashion. What it all comes down to is that servers contain the data, the services that everyone relies on, so they are effectively the most important thing to secure your network. Let's break down 5 types of servers that are of great importance in no particular order and talk about some of the threats and vulnerabilities to those servers and ways to protect them. File servers. A file server computer stores, transfers, migrate, synchronize and archive files. Really, any computer can act as a file server of sorts, but an example of actual server software include Microsoft Windows Server, Mac OS X Server, and various types of Linux server versions, for example Ubuntu Server, Red Hat Server, not to mention Unix. File servers are vulnerable to the same type of attacks and malware that typical desktop computers are. To secure file servers and the rest of the servers on the list, employ hardening, updating, anti-malware applications, software-based firewalls, hard-based intrusion detection systems, HIDs and encryption, and be sure to monitor the server regularly. Network controllers. A network controller is a server that acts as a central repository of user accounts and computer accounts on the network. All users log into this server. An example of this would be a Windows Server system that has been promoted to a domain controller runs Active Directory. In addition to the attacks mentioned for file servers, a domain controller can be a victim of LDAP injection. It has Kerberos vulnerabilities which can ultimately result in privilege escalation and spoofing. LDAP injection can be prevented with proper input validation, but in specific case of a Windows domain controller, really the only way to keep it protected aside from the preventive measures mentioned for file servers is to install security specific update hot patches for the OS, even if the latest service pack has been installed. This also applies to Kerberos vulnerabilities. Email servers. Email servers are part of the message server family, which when we make reference to the message server, we mean any server that deals with email, faxing, texting, chatting and so on, but for this section we'll concentrate strictly on the email server. The most common of these is Microsoft Exchange. An Exchange server might run POP3, SMTP and IMAP and allow for Outlook web-based connections. There are lots of protocols and ports running, so it's not surprising to hear some Exchange admins confess that running an email server can be difficult at times. Particularly it is vulnerable to XSS attacks, buffer overflows, DOS, DDoS attacks, SMTP, memory exploits, directly traversal attacks, and of course spam. Bottom line, it has to be protected a lot. An admin needs to keep on top of the latest vulnerabilities and attacks and possibly be prepared to shut down or quarantine an email server at a moment's notice. New attacks and exploits are constantly surfacing because email servers are a common big target with a large attack surface for spam. A hardware-based spam filter is most effective, such as one from Barracuda, but software-based filters can also help to protect the integrity and confidentiality of email-based data. An admin should consider DLP and encryption. Security could also come in the form of secure POP3 and secure SMTP, but also security can come as encrypted SSL, TLS connections, security posture assessment, SPA secure, VPNs and other encryption types, especially for web-based connections. Web-based connections can be particularly insecure. Great care must be taken to secure these connections. For example, push notification services for mobile devices are quite common, while TLS is normally used as a secure channel for email connection. Text and metadata can at times be sent as clear text. A solution to this for the operating system to use a symmetrical key to encrypt the data payload. Vendors may or may not do this, so it is up to the email admin to incorporate the added layer of security, or at least verify that push email providers are implementing it. Thinking a little outside of the box, an admin could consider moving away from Microsoft, which is the victim of most attacks, and move towards a Linux solution such as a Java-based SMTP server built into Apache, or with a third-party tool such as Zimbra, or one of many others. These solutions are not foolproof and still need to be updated, but it is well known fact that historically Linux has not been attacked as often as Microsoft in general, though the difference between the two in manner of attacks experience has shrunk considerably since the turn of the millennium. Web servers. A web server could be the most commonly attacked server of them all. Examples of web servers include Microsoft Internet Information Services, IIS, Apache, HTTP Server, Linux, Lite, TPD, FreeBSD, Oracle, iPlanet, Web Server, Oracle, and iPlanet's predecessor, Sun Java System Web Server, Sun Microsystems. Web servers in general can be the victim of DOS attacks, overflow, XSF, XSRF, remote code execution. Various attacks can make use of backdoors. For example, an IIS. If basic authentication is enabled, a backdoor could be created and attackers could ultimately bypass restrictions. An IIS admin must keep up to date with latest vulnerability reading. Microsoft security bulletins such as this one here, which address possible information disclosure. HTTP technet microsoft.com library security MS 12073. In general, a security administrator should keep up to date with common vulnerabilities and exposure CVE as maintained by MITRE, http://cv.mitre.org. The latest CVE listings for applications and operating systems can be found there and at several other websites. Aside from the usual programming solutions to vulnerabilities such as XSS and standard updating and hot patching, a security admin might consider adding and configuring a hardware-based firewall from Cisco, Juniper, Checkpoint, or other similar company, and of course HTTPS, be it SSL, better yet TLS, can be beneficial if the scenario calls for it. Once a server is secured, you can provide the relative security of the system to users by using an automated vulnerability scanning program such as Netcat that leaves a little image on the web pages that states whether or not the site is secure, and when it has scanned or audited, Apache can be the casualty of many attacks as well, including privilege escalation, code injection, exploits to the proxy portion of the software. PHP forms and the PHP engine could act as gateways to the Apache web server. Patches to known CVEs should be applied ASAP. When it comes to Apache web server, security admins have to watch out for a web server attack called Dark Leech. This takes the form of malicious Apache module, specifically an injected HTML iframe tag within the PHP file. If loaded on a compromised Apache web server, it can initiate all kinds of attacks and deliver various payloads of malware and ransomware. Or it could redirect a user to another site that contains an exploit kit such as Black Hole exploit kit mentioned in chapter 2. Through Dark Leech, it is not limited to Apache. The bulk of Dark Leech infective sites have been Apache based. FTP Server. An FTP server can be used to provide basic file access publicly or privately. Examples of FTP servers include the FTP server built into IIS, an Apache FTP server, or other third-party offerings such as FileZilla server and Pure FTPD. The standard default FTP server is pretty much insecure. It uses well-known ports 2021, doesn't use encryption by default, and has basic username password authentication. As a result, FTP servers are often the victim of many types of attacks. Examples include bounce attacks, when a person attempts to hijack the FTP service to scan other computers; buffer overflow attempts, when an attacker tries to send an extremely long username or password or file name to trigger the overflow; and attacks on the anonymous account if utilized, if the files to be stored on the FTP server are at all confidential. The security administrator should consider additional security. This can be done by incorporating FTP software that utilizes secure file transfer protocols such as FTPS or SFTP. Additional security can be provided by using FTP software that uses dynamic assignment of data ports instead of using port 20 every time. Encryption can prevent most attackers from reading the data files, even if they are able to get access to them. Of course, if not a public FTP, the anonymous account should be disabled, but there are other more sinister attacks lurking. One that works in conjunction with the web server, which is often on the same computer or part of the same software suite, for instance the Webshell. There are plenty of variants of the Webshell, but we detail its basic function. The Webshell is a program that is installed on a web server by an attacker and is used to remotely access and reconfigure the server without the owner's consent. Webshells are remote access trojans, RATs, but are also referred to as backdoors since they offer an alternative way of accessing the website for the attacker. The reason I placed the Webshell attack here in the FTP section is because it is usually the FTP server that contains the real vulnerability. Weak passwords. Once an attacker figures out an administrator password of the FTP server, often through brute force attempts, the attacker can easily install the web shell and effectively do anything desired to that web server or the FTP server. It seems like a house of cards. In a way it is. How can we prevent this from happening? First, increase the password security and change the passwords of all administrator accounts. Second, eliminate any unnecessary accounts, especially any surplus admin accounts and the dreaded anonymous account. Next, strongly consider separating the FTP server and web server into two different computes or virtual machines. Finally, set up automated scans for web shell scripts using PHP files, lo and behold, or have the web server provider do so. If the provider doesn't offer that kind of scanning, use a different provider. If a web shell attack is accomplished successfully on the server, the security admin must at very least search for and delete the original RAT files, or worst and at worst re-image the system and restore from a backup. This latter option is often necessary if the attacker has had some time to compromise the server. Some organizations have policies that state servers must be re-imaged if they are compromised in any way, shape or form. It's a way of starting anew with a clean slate, but it also means a lot of configuring for the admin. But again, the overall concern here is the complexity of and the frequency of changing the password. That's the short list of servers, but there are plenty others you need to sorry, I'm after losing where I am. Okay. But there are plenty of other servers you need to be cognizant of, including DNS application servers, virtualization servers, firewall proxy servers, database servers, print servers, remote connectivity servers such as RRAS, VPN, and computer telephony integration CTI servers. If you are in charge of securing a server, be sure to examine the CVEs and the bulletins for that software and be ready to hot patch the system at a moment's notice. This means having an RDP, VNC or other remote connection to that specific server ready to go to your desktop so that you can access it quickly. Chapter summary. Designing a secure network is more than just setting up a Microsoft Visio documented dragging a firewall onto the LAN. This might have been good security planning in 1998, but today we need a plan that includes many layers of protection, allowing for defense, for in-depth. For instance, today's networks require specifically secure devices such as switches, routers, and telephony equipment, and those networks might need DMZ, demilitarized zones, DMZs, intrusion prevention systems, content filters, network access control, NAC, subnetting, virtual local area network, VLANs, and of course firewalls. Keep in mind that some of these technologies might exist on or be moved to the cloud. This opens up Pandora's box when it comes to security. The security administrator needs to be sure not only that resources are secured properly, but also that the cloud provider is reputable and will take care of its end of safety of the organization's data and infrastructure. An organization has a lot of choices when it comes to the cloud. Software as a service, SaaS, infrastructure as a service, IaaS, platform as a service, PaaS, and security as a service, CCaaS. And some of the main types of cloud offerings. SaaS is probably the most common and is used to run web-based applications remotely. IaaS offloads the network infrastructure of a company to the cloud and utilizes virtual machines to store entire operating systems. PaaS enables organizations to develop applications in a powerful virtual environment without using internal resources. CCaaS incorporates security services to a corporate structure on a subscription basis in an efficient way that many small, mid-sized companies cannot provide. Some organizations will opt to use more than one of these solutions. One type of cloud solution is selected. An organization must select whether its resources will be kept publicly, privately, or a mixture of two, hybrid or community orientated. This will be based on the budget and manpower of the organization in question, but each option has its own set of security concerns. Besides loss of administrative power, an organization going to the cloud might encounter data integrity issues, availability issues, worst of all, potential loss of confidentiality. That's the entire CIA triad right there. So making use of the cloud should be approached warily. To reduce the chance of data breaches on the cloud, organizations make use of complex passwords, password cloud, data access policies, strong authentication methods, encryption, and protection of data applications on several levels. It's the servers that are of the greatest concern. They are attacked, and most often as if they who contain the data. The common victims are email servers, web-based servers, FTP servers, because they are so readily accessible. Because of the plethora of ways they can be compromised, patching systems is an excellent method of protection and keeping up to date with the latest common vulnerabilities exposure. CVE is the best way to know exactly what needs to be patched. As a final remark, a good security administrator has to remember that any platform is susceptible to attack in one form or another. Every single server and networking device, either on the local network or in the cloud, should be secured accordingly. So I'm going to leave it here today for this video. If you like listening, please consider like, sharing and subscribing. Thank you.